Good morning and welcome to the May Coffee Talk for the Libertarian Party of Pinellas County. We have the fantastic opportunity to hear from a former Pinellas County Libertarian who now works in Washington, D.C., Jess Mears. She and I have known each other for a little over 5 years now. We actually met at the Orlando convention in 2016, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say about working within the Libertarian Party, working on campaigns, and working in the Liberty movement. With no further ado, I would like to share this conversation with you with Jess Mears.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and I really appreciate you waking up early this morning to join us on Zoom to talk about my experience. I have a slideshow that I'm going to get started in just a few moments, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about the background of how I became a libertarian. In 2006, a friend of mine reached out to me and told me that MySpace was no longer cool. She said, Facebook is so much better. She was in college and I was a senior in high school. And she was like, you should probably sign up for Facebook. And I listened to her advice and I registered. And one of the first questions that I was asked after my personal name and email address was my political affiliation. And at that point in my life, I realized I did not have a political affiliation. I had a family that didn't talk about politics, despite that I grew up in a really conservative area of Northwestern Ohio. And I had to kind of go out on my own journey to find out what's my affiliation and what should I put in this box. I found the world's smallest political quiz. I also found the Libertarian Party's platform. When I read the platform, I agreed with everything except for one piece of it that is actually not there anymore. And that was the legalization of cannabis. That was in the platform back in the early 2000s. And at the time I was a teenager. I was really involved with my church, and I had this view that doing drugs was a moral sin and would send people to eternal damnation. Well, then after a few years of time in college, I started to learn that cannabis is not what I had thought it was before. And at that point, then I became a real libertarian because I agreed with the entire portion of the Libertarian Party's platform, including the part about cannabis. So when I got to college, I first looked around at Welcome Week, and I saw there were campus Republicans, campus Democrats, but the Libertarians didn't exist. So I had to go off and figure out how to get, oops. That's not what I was trying to share. I had to go and figure out how to find people to become part of a student organization with me. And I'm going to share my screen, so I need actually a little bit of time to figure this one out. Give me a moment. In the meantime, Brett, could I get some co-hosting? Are you seeing my screen?
No, I see you, and now I see me. There you go.
Okay.
I see you.
Awesome. All right. Now I have my screen on. I was afraid you saw how many browser tabs I keep open at all times. All right. So when I saw on Welcome Week, there are campus Republicans and campus Democrats, no campus Libertarians, I was like, I guess I have to go and figure out where are the Libertarians, and I have to become a Libertarian community organizer. So that started a really long journey that I have been embarking on about building movements and grassroots. I've been primarily operating as a grassroots activist since 2007. It wasn't until 2016 where my life started to take a different trajectory. I had been involved at the county level, like Libertarian Party county affiliate meetings, just like the one that we're at, until I had an opportunity with the Johnson Weld campaign. In 2016, a gentleman that was involved in the Johnson Weld campaign asked me if I could spend a couple hours a month helping with the Libertarian Party of Florida's Johnson Weld campaign. That was a complete lie. Nobody that gets involved in a presidential campaign in the leadership capacity spends a couple hours a month doing that work. But it ended up being a really good decision because I am where I am today because this man asked me to spend a couple hours a month helping with the campaign. So in the last few years, some organizations that I have represented and worked for were the Libertarian National Party, the Johnson Weld campaign, and Dr. Jo Jorgensen's Spike Cohen 2020 campaign. But my start didn't just happen with that phone call in 2016 when this gentleman asked me for a couple hours a month. Actually, my first presidential campaign was Bob Barr's campaign in 2008. We hosted Congressman Bob Barr on my campus for a speaking engagement. So that was really my first taste of presidential politics. But it really took a big turn in 2016 after that man asked me for a couple hours a month. I spent time in Florida trying to get the campaign organized, and we started organizing and mobilizing faster than the campaigns that had paid staff. And in the state of Florida, we had zero paid staff. There was zero expectations to ever hire anyone in the state of Florida since it wasn't a targeted state. But when they realized that I had the experience, they asked if I wanted to go do it in Colorado. I did not want to move to Colorado for the next 4 or 5 months, but I said, I'll do anything else that doesn't require relocation. So I was offered an opportunity to work for Governor Bill Weld. And here you can see, this is the time I got to meet Governor Weld for the first time. And then flash forward, this was election night when I was with Governor Johnson, and I was in the background. And this is one of my favorite pictures because I chose the balloons on that election night party. I fought for balloons. Turns out helium's very expensive. I bet James Ray can tell us all about helium and the cost of it. Balloons are very expensive. I had to fight to get those balloons, but this picture is just absolutely stunning. The blue and yellow balloons in the background. The lady with the blue sweater and white hair, that was Governor Gary Johnson's mom in the background. And Gary Johnson entered into his election night party. Kind of nobody was telling him when to enter. This just happened. So it was a moment where I didn't even realize he was about to come in the door, but he came into his election night party and, well, I guess it was time to get the party started. And this is a still shot from when I got to give a speech in Cincinnati. I think I got to do something really cheeky and really cool that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I brought my absentee ballot from Florida to Cincinnati. I went to the University of Cincinnati in college. So we brought Bob Barr there. Then I brought Gary Johnson to Cincinnati, and being able to vote for Gary Johnson in Cincinnati and give that speech and then welcome him up onto the stage was such a cool moment during my career that I wanted to share it with you. And then this past year, I got to do something kind of cheeky again. I had my absentee ballot, but I decided I didn't want to do the voting thing once again. I wanted to let other people have opportunities to do a speaking engagement. So I just cheekily asked Jo Jorgensen if she would sign my absentee ballot for me. So that was my 2016 experience. I was advance for Governor Gary Johnson and Governor Bill Weld. In 2020, I had a really cool opportunity. I was Dr. Jo Jorgensen's aide to get me onto the campaign. And then I took on a number of projects and was promoted to deputy campaign manager while continuing on to do my duties as her aide on the presidential campaign. This brought me to a lot of places. This is an image here from the state of Alaska. Dr. Jorgensen did some hockey in Alaska because she's a hockey player. You can see I'm on ice skates and texting reporters to get the next reporter ready to go. Here's a picture from Dr. Jorgensen while we were in Alaska visiting a cannabis store. While I was in Alaska, I went there actually in advance of Dr. Jorgensen getting to Alaska because her mother passed away while she was campaigning. And we were about to leave for Alaska and hop on a flight from Boston to get to Washington to get to Alaska. She unfortunately got the news that her mother's health was declining. And so I ended up going to Alaska to try to get things set up, knowing that we had a situation that we didn't know what was happening at the time. And so while Dr. Jorgensen took a few days off the campaign trail to grieve and be with family during the loss of her mother, we were getting everything that we had set up for that Alaska trip rearranged, because we were expecting her to come back to the campaign trail after taking a few days off. So while I was there and we were trying to take advantage of the opportunity to have staff in the state of Alaska, we walked around and we saw this really cool sign that was outside of a cannabis dispensary. And it said that there was going to be a public hearing for on-site consumption. And so my colleague and I, Seth Levy, we were like, Seth saw that and he's like, do you see what this is? On-site consumption? I don't think this exists anywhere else in the world. Seth lives in Colorado, so he knew more about cannabis and dispensary laws than I do. And he said, I think this might be like the first place that's trying to ever have on-site consumption of cannabis. So we did some more research. We went and met with the store owner. We found out that while Dr. Jorgensen was expected to be back on the campaign trail in Alaska, that the city council of Juneau was going to be meeting, and they were going to be voting on the first ever policy change for on-site consumption in an establishment of cannabis. Now, think about that. People have been drinking in bars since the beginning of the first time alcohol was fermented. And people have not been able to, in the United States, consume cannabis inside of an establishment. Despite that, overwhelmingly 60+% of people agree that cannabis should be able to be used by people. So this was a really cool opportunity that Seth saw just by looking at that sign and thinking a little bit about it and then finding an opportunity. So what happened was Dr. Jorgensen actually zoomed in to the city council meeting and gave public testimony advocating for the city council to legalize on-site consumption of cannabis. And that vote was 5-0. Every single one of them voted for on-site consumption for this store in Juneau, Alaska. And not only did they vote the way that we were hoping they would vote, they were also thrilled to have their first ever presidential candidate on their city council meeting. It was one of the coolest things. I lost the video, but I'm going to dig it up and send it to you because she knocked it out of the park. She was phenomenal and it was so fun and so cool. And then this is history. And these are the things that people didn't hear about. It didn't make TV news. It barely made libertarian news. I reached out to Reason Magazine and said, do you want this exclusive Jo Jorgensen advocating for the first ever on-site consumption policy change of cannabis? And we couldn't really even get anybody to pay attention to what I thought would be record news that hasn't even happened before. So I'm glad to share that news with you, and I'll send you the video of the public testimony as soon as I can dig it up. So here's another picture from Alaska. This was in the newspaper, and Jo Jorgensen went to Ketchikan. Ketchikan is that town in Alaska that you can only get to by a boat. It's an island, and it's also right next to the road to nowhere, the bridge to nowhere. So it's a pretty cool place to visit with only about 6,000 people that actually live in Ketchikan. But they put in the newspaper that it might be the first time ever that a presidential candidate went to Ketchikan. So here was probably my proudest moment from the campaign, next to Jo advocating for the cannabis on-site consumption, is when the Washington Times published an article that said she may be labeled a third-party candidate, but Ms. Jorgensen, the first woman to win the Libertarian Party's presidential nod, has been campaigning like a top-tier nominee. She's convinced the more people she can reach, the more they will be willing to break out of the duopoly that dominates American politics. And that to me was such a proud moment. Calling our candidate a top-tier nominee, that to me said, we're doing something right. So I want to tell you about mostly what we were doing in 2020 that went right. It started off with a vision that I had. We had to quickly shift gears to figure out how were we going to campaign in 2020. When I jumped on the campaign, it was just a couple weeks after Dr. Jorgensen got the nomination, and things were really not up and running. There's so many things that have to happen when somebody becomes a presidential candidate that oftentimes campaign teams are taken for a whirlwind. And so I hopped on, and my experience in 2016, like I mentioned, I did advance for Governor Johnson and Bill Weld. That meant I was doing event planning. I was planning it, I was on the ground, I was with the governors, and I learned in 2016 so much. I didn't know how to host a rally before that. Like I told you about how in 2008, I hosted the speaking engagement for Bob Barr on my campus, but I didn't really understand how to make a political rally. But I learned that in 2016 because I had mentors. The 2016 campaign hired people from outside of the Libertarian Party, people from John McCain, John Kasich, Bernie Sanders. They were hiring everyone except for LP insiders. And I was one of the lucky ones that got one of these positions. But I learned from those people that I worked with. And then 2020, I got to apply it, and I got to teach people. 2020 was my year for teaching people how to do campaigning. So I had this vision. That I shared with this team of Jo Jorgensen in front of a bus. And I was telling everybody about how this was going to work, how we were going to have a campaign event with a bus, and nobody was clicking. Nobody was understanding it until I asked our graphic designer, can you make this happen for me? So she made this graphic here. This is part of a presentation that I gave to our project managers. Laura might remember a lot of conversations that happened before Jo Jorgensen came in a bus to St. Petersburg. So what ended up happening? We ended up giving Dr. Jorgensen a campaign bus with her face on it, and it was a 40-foot bus. It's a $1.5 million tour bus. And during 2020, tour buses were put in storage units. They were not out on the road. We were very, very fortunate to have on the campaign team a woman named Kenna Porter. Her family does work for Jason Aldean, so she has experience and ties in the music industry. And when we decided we were going to pursue a tour bus, her family helped us with connections. We got an absolute steal on renting a tour bus because they were not being used. And the one that we ended up using was Luke Combs, his production tour bus. He's a very big country music star. So we used one of the buses that's part of his tour. Here is another picture of the bus. This was in North Carolina at a distillery. So what has to go into preparing for a tour bus tour? We had so much to learn. Like I mentioned, Kenna Porter and her family connections helped us to find the contract with the company that we used. And we also had an individual named Roy Shelton. He is with Stoney LaRue. Stoney LaRue is a country music artist that's really big in Texas. And he's one of the sound engineers for Stoney and part of his tour. So we had like really great connections with people who have experience with tours, and we had to learn from them. We had to do things like routing. We had to get permits. Every single city that we went to, we had to evaluate, does this event where we're trying to have it, does it need a permit? How much does it cost? How much time do we have to get the permit? Who can go to the city council and go walk in and say, hey, we have an event in 1 week with this presidential candidate. Can we bypass your 3-week deadline to get this permit? And then they'd say, we're not issuing permits right now. And then it's like, all right, well, then how do we make it a protest? We had to get insurance. During a pandemic, we were asking an insurance company, how can we get insurance during a pandemic to have in-person events? We had to check COVID compliance. There were some states that we couldn't go to for certain periods of times because of coronavirus. We never were able to get to New Mexico because of coronavirus. Staffing, we needed sound, we needed let's see, what else? There's so many needs for staffing a bus tour. We had a videographer, a cinematographer for some of it. Staging, getting that stage like I showed you in the initial vision that I shared with the team. We had to figure out what was going to make Dr. Jorgensen look presentable as she was campaigning. Materials, we had t-shirts, rack cards, bumper stickers, promoting these events. What good is it if you're sending a presidential candidate out on the road with nobody to talk to? Thankfully, that never happened. And mobilizing and empowering volunteers. People like Laura Hartman, she's on the call, Matt Skopek, they really put in a lot of last minute time to get this to be a successful event in St. Petersburg, where I got to see James Ray, and he gave us an amazing bottle of coconut rum. So thank you, James, for that while we were in St. Pete. So we got to 48 states in total. Between Spike and Joe, 48 states were touched by the campaign. I bet you can probably guess that that's a lot. That's a lot of states in 4 months. And not only did we get to 48 states, but a lot of the states had us twice. So we covered a lot of ground. It wasn't all by bus. You can see this map has like some buses, some planes. So this is just a map representation of where this campaign reached everyone. Here is a picture from the North Carolina event that I showed at that distillery, and I kind of wanted to really point out, you can see there's this sandwich board here. We had a big task on our hand. Campaigning during a pandemic, that's something I don't think a libertarian has ever done before, but we had to figure out, how do we make this work without the media crucifying us? Because we already have enough time, a hard enough time as it is, getting positive media attention. But what I was very afraid that we were going to be considered like a super spreader campaign. Thankfully, there were no reports of coronavirus that spread at any of our events because we did them all outdoors for the most part. There were a few indoor events, very rare though. And we had things like COVID mitigation plans. We had these sandwich boards asking people when they were arriving at the event, please stay apart, please wear a mask. We had hand sanitizer stations with masks available. We ordered actually too many masks. In June, when we started all of the plans, that was still really on in the coronavirus pandemic to even have a good idea of what we needed. I think we ordered like 6,000 plus masks, and we went through like hardly any of them. So the campaign got a chance to donate those afterwards. So what happened after the campaign trail ended on election night? The election night party, we didn't know what happened. We didn't know who was the president on election day. A number of states were still razor thin in their projections, and it came down to 4 states. We didn't know until November 7th, even though the election was on November 3rd, who ended up becoming the president. But in these states, the votes that separated Biden and Trump, Jo Jorgensen had way more than that margin between the two of them. So we were really on election night, really in a position to look at being the kingmakers in this election. I know the Libertarian Party, our votes are votes that we earned. Dr. Jorgensen earned every single one of her votes. And if she was not a choice on the ballot, it is impossible to know the outcome. But we did in this election year, the way everything panned out, we put ourselves in a position where we really did make a difference in this election. The vote totals in those states, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Jo's votes really did make a difference. So without her in this race, it's impossible to say what would have happened, but I'm really glad that she was in the race. I'm really glad she gave people the option to vote. And I'm really glad that more people are paying attention to libertarians and our ability to bring out voters, inspire people to vote, and add more people to the process. In the news here, Reason Magazine, they reported Jo Jorgensen heading towards second best result in Libertarian Party history. This was the day after the election. She had 1.5 million votes. We ended up with 1.8 plus million votes, very close to 1.9 million. Reporters started asking, does Joe Biden owe his win to Jo Jorgensen? Here's a picture of Joe speaking at a state convention, and this slide shows the cost per vote for every single presidential campaign since 1980. And as you can see, that number is on the downward trend. Every single year, it becomes cheaper and cheaper for us to acquire votes. This is something I want you to really kind of internalize. The campaign in 2020 raised $3 million. That's a very thin budget for running for president when Trump and Biden were running billion-dollar campaigns. And for $1.83, we were able to attract one voter. So remember when I talked about this bus? We were looking at this as a cost-effective measure of trying to campaign. 48 states on $3 million plus all of the things that need to happen with a presidential campaign, ad spending, that is a very, very small budget. And we utilize the opportunity during coronavirus with the buses that were just sitting around to get a steal on it. So I think this is something that we need to continue to think about, is how can we maximize our reach to get and attract as many votes as possible? Because I think in 24, we're going to be able to see another year we're going to be able to attract a lot of voters, just like in 2016. In 2016, we got 4.5 million votes off an $11 million budget. So where does that put my thought process now that the election for 2020 is in the past? I am looking towards the future, and what do I want for the future in 2024? Your name here on a private jet, okay? We're getting PJs in 2024. So I am looking at the future, not in 2024 am I going to be looking at presidential campaigning. I'm looking at it right now. I think the thing that the Libertarian Party fails to do is continue to build for presidential campaigns between election cycles. Going local and focusing local is so important. State legislature wins are so important. Winning federal elections for Congress, so important. But my personal interest is presidential campaigning. You can see, I didn't show you these pictures to brag. I'm showing you these pictures because I really value the experience that I've had, and it has completely changed the trajectory of my career to have these opportunities. And I wanted to inspire you to consider, if you want to maybe help some people, if you're not interested in getting involved in presidential campaigning to the level that I have, maybe my story can inspire people that you can talk to, and you can tell them that there is a place for them to have these opportunities. And what I'm going to continue to focus on doing is making sure that there's more opportunities for people to be able to be in these roles in the future. In 2016, I learned, and in 2020, I taught, and in 2024, I'm going to activate and bring lots of people with me for our private jet. So I'm looking towards the future. I'm looking to work with people in every single state to figure out what are we going to do to get closer to the White House in the next presidential election cycle, because I think that's what Americans deserve. I think Americans deserve to have representation that cares about their rights, that respects individuals, that wants to restore dignity. And so I am excited to be able to answer any questions that you might have about my experience, about my thoughts on the next few years. I want to give a quick little synopsis of what's going on at the federal level. We have a lot of things right in front of us that could rapidly change our lives and our existence in the United States. Joe Biden is the president of the United States. Unfortunately, I didn't succeed in getting Dr. Jorgensen elected. But we have a lot of things moving right now at the federal level with our legislature. We have some pretty scary bills. HR1, the PRO Act. We have an infrastructure bill that's trillions and trillions of dollars. If this spending continues, we're going to be looking at inflation rates exceeding 10%. Or if the spending and these bills pass, we could be looking at inflation rates of 10+%. And the infrastructure bill is like wrapping up so many different components of the Democrats' wish list. They have things like parts of the Green New Deal in there. What's that going to do? It's going to make it so that way we cannot mine things or like produce copper. What does copper do? It's utilized for electric cars. What does the Green New Deal require? Us to use electric cars. But then it's like, oh, but you can't use copper to charge the cars. So then what are we going to have to do? Import the copper from out of the country to have these electric cars? I mean, this stuff makes absolutely no sense. Yet the Democrats are pushing this agenda. And we're looking at, if these things are able to pass, so much spending that it's very, very scary for what's going to happen for our economy. The one thing that's preventing all of these bills from passing right now is the filibuster rule. So there are two senators that have kind of bucked party tradition to say that they will continue to support the filibuster rule, and that is Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. So if those two Democrats continue to uphold the filibuster rule, we're unlikely to see the things like the infrastructure bill passing. However, there are some there's like this budget amendment that they could potentially pass without having the filibuster rule to pass this legislation. So I'm imploring you to continue to be vigilant about federal issues and lobby people in the Florida, your congressmen, your senators, and tell them that you do not want to see this outrageous spending that's going to impact the lives of every single American, and make it so that we can't charge our cars because there's no copper, or the copper's too expensive, or it becomes the mandated electric cars that everyone's going to have to drive are going to cost $1 million or something. So I have a little bit of good news, though. I'm not here to terrify you on a Saturday morning with our coffee, but the good news is that soldiers are coming home from Afghanistan. Thankfully, Joe Biden is continuing to hold on to the commitment that Donald Trump made to end the war in Afghanistan. There's some state policy wins that have been awesome. We have states that are ending qualified immunity for police or even all state employees. And we're seeing a lot of states move forward with school choice. I know that Florida is one of the states that's actually starting to lead in education. So there's a lot to be excited about, even with some of the bad news. And now I'm ready to hopefully answer some questions about campaigning, since that's the thing I care the most about.
Well, guys, I want to take this opportunity to thank Jess for joining us today. We're all adults. I'm sure that we'll all be able to organize ourselves through spontaneous order to be able to ask our questions of Jess. I know that James has been ready for quite a while, so we'll go ahead and start with him, and then we'll be able to continue our conversation as Jess answers those questions. I'm going to move back to a gallery view for those who are watching this after the fact, just because it'll be easier as people try to position and unmute to ask their questions. So James, take it away.
Okay, I got a multi-part question for you, Jess, to start with, and this is really important. And first of all, I wish Joe had visited the Siesta Key Rum Distillery, and this is the vat size of coconut rum, because I gave them a normal size bottle, but actually when I use the normal size bottles, it's like depressing. I find out I'm an alky because the damn thing dies so fast. But the first question, and there's a couple, is what was the fate of that bottle? I mean, I haven't heard anything about parties and, shenanigans. What happened?
There's very little time for shenanigans on a $3 million presidential campaign. But we did celebrate and really enjoy the coconut rum. So thank you. It goes very well with Coca-Cola.
you know what my favorite drink with it is pouring it over Publix pineapple chunks. You know, I don't know if I told you guys about that, but that's like the greatest invention ever, because it's a combination dessert and drink, and there's only 2 ingredients and you can't get it wrong. It's pretty much great. Anyway, the other 2 things I was going to say is I have really, really, really good, but provisionally, you know, hopeful news about my gay agenda for Sarasota. Ideally, there's this super talented gay dude, and I think he's a libertarian, and I think he even thinks he's a libertarian. And if he is, I've all of a sudden, you know, I've had this massive coup where the whole county is super organized, and he has these parties, and they're gay parties, but what the hell, I'll be gay. They're gay parties, and they have like at least 100 people every single time, and getting a dozen people for me was really, really tough, you know, even when we were trying to have fun. His parties, everyone has fun. The last one, the last party I went to of his, he had a problem of too many people. It was, you know, it was too crowded. This is the kind of problem that we need in the LPF. And the third thing is, one of my persuasion failures, but hopefully you all can somehow get there someday. I wanted to get, after she got bit, I wanted to get Jo Jorgensen to the Bracken Bat Cave. Bat Conservation International has this cave in Texas that is unique in the world as far as these bats go. And the bats, there's so damn many of them, they show up on radar, and they do a huge amount of good. Environmental good, farming good that people don't even know about because they do it at night and they eat bugs. And so, you know, I want us to become the bat people. So I have actually kept the bat logo up on my Twitter, and I'm hoping everybody else does, but that's it.
So
Thanks, James.
finding pineapple chunks while on a bus tour is quite a difficult task, but something even more difficult is finding doctors that have the rabies vaccine all across the country. So when you decide to get the rabies vaccine, you have to get four series of vaccinations or shots within 2 weeks. So Dr. Jorgensen's bus tour was 2 weeks, and she had her bat encounter on day 0 of the bus tour. And so I went with her to 4 different hospitals and emergency rooms and doctors' offices for her to go get 4 series of the rabies vaccine. And here's an interesting tidbit about being a presidential candidate that most people don't think about is you're going to have out-of-pocket costs. Dr. Jorgensen's insurance in multiple states, that doesn't cover the way our healthcare works. Just because you need healthcare doesn't mean that everything's covered. So she had a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that the campaign did not reimburse her for, because I don't believe that's something legal to do, is to do healthcare reimbursements for incidents that happen on the trail. So that's something to think about. I put on the PJ your name here. So any one of you could run for president in 2024, but think about that, is that you might even have to come out of pocket for a number of expenses on the campaign trail. And talking about that private jet, I have big dreams for our 2024 candidate, and those dreams really start now. We have to start preparing for the 2024 election right now, and how's the best way to do that, if you're interested, is I hope that whenever I figure out what I'm going to be doing next on, I reach out, that you might be willing to help me. But one of the best ways is to continue to build the Libertarian Party. 2024's nominee is going to need a lot of support. They're going to need strong county affiliates. So people in Brett Bittner's shoes. That's another place where you're going to actually probably have some out-of-pocket expenses as a county party chair. At this moment, there's very few county party chairs that have a paid income for the Libertarian Party. So the people like Brett, who are county leaders, are doing this in their free time. We need more people to be leaders and make sure that these county affiliates exist, because by the time 2024 rolls around, it's too late to start organizing. You already have to have some kind of organization. You have to have your name out there. So community building. is a tricky subject. How do you build a community? Well, communities aren't very easy to identify. It's not simple. Sometimes communities are kind of a little difficult to find. So people are going to be looking up, how do I get involved with this campaign in 2024 in the future? They're going to be finding the information of what you guys are doing today in order to connect with you. All the work that you do now is ground game for 2024. So I would highly encourage you not only to stay involved, at minimum to be a warm body in the audience. That's one of a really easy way to show your support for the people who decide to step up and be leaders. But also a few dollars here and there, $5 a month really does help to offset those expenses for the website. I talked about, how do people find you? You have to have your name out there. You need to have a website. So many organizations don't forget to pay their annual fee for their website, and then it just goes away. Keeping those things up does cost some money. It doesn't cost a lot, but $5 a month to your county affiliate is really going to help you have some kind of base of operations. So that way you'll, in 2024, have a website that's still up and available so people can find you.
All right, guys, we have questions from both Laura and Morgan Rigg. After that, just I think we'll probably have to kind of end things for the day, at least for the recorded portion. So if you do have another question, just save it until after we've stopped the recording for the more social aspect for those who are here in person. So Laura, go ahead, ask away.
Jess, you inspire me. You've always inspired me, and I love just watching this all come full circle and you being here. Specifically related to community building, can you talk about the importance of getting to know your volunteers so you can see their comparative advantage, or not burning them out, or talking about the importance of getting to know people? Everyone has value, and supporting what their value is so they can feel part of the campaign.
Yeah. I think that's one of the easiest ways is to help people get involved, is just to find out what it is that they want to do and putting them in an opportunity to do that. So often people will reach out and offer their expertise, and it goes without being acknowledged. And what I did in 2020 is a man reached out to me and offered to volunteer. So I said, okay, well, let me tell you something that I need help with. I need to know COVID restrictions in every single state. So what did the guy do? Spent a couple of days putting together an Excel sheet of every single state and their COVID restrictions. That was work he probably didn't want to do. When you say comparative advantage, what's he best at doing, or what can he do at a lower cost than anyone else? Well, he was a volunteer. That was $0. So that was some work that was really valuable to the campaign and so helpful that I didn't have time to do. But what was this guy's actual talent? It's sound. He did the routing. He knew the legal requirements for driving. So it turns out the federal government restricts the amount of time that somebody can be driving professionally during the day before they lose their license. And it's not just like, oh, you can go a little over, it's okay. No, there's actual, there's mechanics inside of these buses that will put a ding if the bus is going too many miles or too many hours within one day, and the driver then can have their license pulled from them. So this gentleman had to find, with the routing, not only is it just routing, it's how much time do you get from this point to this point, and make sure that there's enough time built in so that way you're not over time. That happened once. We had to learn really early on that there's schedules and you have to stick to them, or else your driver's not going to be happy with you, because you're going to be on the side of the highway and you're going to be stuck there and you can't move on because you've met time. Now he did this one time that we had this incident happen. We were like within an hour of getting to our destination, and he was able to make it an emergency that we had to continue to get on. But had we continued on with that path, we wouldn't have a driver, because our driver would have said, I'm not working with you guys anymore because you're going to jeopardize my career at this point. So finding that gentleman that offered to help with just anything, that was a blessing, and he was so helpful. But what really came out of that was somebody that made this campaign so much more successful, because we had an experienced tour bus manager. He's managed tours before for Stony LaRue, and he was willing to lend that expertise at $0. He invested so much of his time helping us with the behind the scenes. So we made him our remote tour manager. And this was just a guy who reached out to me knowing that I was in the campaign and knew that I was somebody that was trying to engage people. And he gave us so much more than I could have ever asked for. So when somebody's offering help, figure out a way that they can help you. There's always a way to let somebody contribute to what it is that you're trying to do that they're good at. So find out what they're good at, ask them what they want to do. And if they don't know yet, try to give them an opportunity to figure that out. You can work together to find out how somebody can be absolutely instrumental. And this guy had fun. He made friends. This was his first political campaign. He's never done it before, but he's somebody that I found is reliable, and he's got great experience. He was a pleasure and a delight to work with. And there were times on the campaign where we had some interpersonal issues. Think about how you're on a tour bus together. It's very tight quarters. Not only is it tight quarters, but it's high pressure. We had so much pressure on us those first few days. We didn't know exactly what we were doing. It was just kind of like, Jesus, take the wheel and let's go. So when there were some interpersonal issues, this guy having time on the tour bus, on the schedule from his career, he knew what to say to people to kind of fix it and make sure that we could continue to go on, and that Dr. Jorgensen had a team behind her that was cohesive and didn't let things get in our way. So that was really awesome to have his experience. And without him, that campaign, the tour bus could have been an absolute disaster without that person helping us. So big props to Roy. I'm going to send this recording to him so that way he knows how much I appreciate him. Thank you, Laura.
Morgan's going to have our final question here before we stop the recording. Morgan, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Brett. Jess, thanks again for just extending the invitation for this call. I appreciate it. It's I may live in Indiana, but there's a lot of helpful information here, so I appreciate that. But you mentioned about preparing for the presidential campaign. We start now, so I might as well ask the question. Who do you see likely throwing their hat into the ring for the party nomination in 2024? And more importantly, who would you want to see throwing their hat into the ring in 2024?
Thank you, Morgan. And it was great to see you in Indiana. And thanks for supporting the Jorgensen campaign last year while you were in Indiana. I really appreciate everything that you did for the campaign and for all the other campaigns that you helped, by the way. So in 2024, I'm very excited that we have Congressman Justin Amash as a member of the Libertarian Party, someone that is continuing to try to build the Libertarian Party. He has he joined the party just a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, but he's committed to continuing to build the party. And what I like the most about his continued commitment is whether or not he decides to run in 2024, he's going to try to help make sure that the Libertarian Party is best positioned for the next presidential race. So what I like about him being involved is he's going to be one of our top recruiters. There are a lot of people that could potentially run for president that we are not even thinking of yet. They're going to emerge. And so it's a little too early to really clearly identify who's going to be a front runner for 2024. But what I'm focused on is the infrastructure. So building that movement, fundraising. I mean, Dr. Jorgensen, when she started her campaign, how much money was in the bank? It wasn't $3 million. But how much more could we have done if she had $3 million on nomination day? A heck of a lot more. So I'm going to be focused on what can we do about fundraising? What can we do about mobilizing? Let's best position Libertarians for 2024. And these are all things I'm going to be doing in my personal time, as a caveat, since this is recorded, these will be things that I want to work on as just an individual. But my family, my friends, they're within the Libertarian Party. These are people that I've enjoyed working with, and I want to continue working with you guys. And I want to have our lives for Americans to be a lot better. I want all the things that we see on the news to be happy rather than tragic.
Guys, I want to thank you all for coming this morning. I want to thank Jess for taking the time out of her Saturday morning. Thank you guys so much. I want to remind you that we'll be delaying next month's coffee talk by a week so that we do not interfere with the state party convention, which is June the 11th through the 13th in Lakeland. But on June the 19th, you see right here, we'll have Hesham El-Maliji from Muslims for Liberty talking about how his organization fits into the libertarian movement and how libertarians that also have a similar religious background and what that means. I was able to confirm yesterday the time and the date since we had to move it a week, but he was able to do that with us. And I want to thank anybody who has watched this after the fact and hope that you do join us on June the 19th at 9 a.m. We will certainly be having another fantastic coffee talk.